Hello, my name is Namhee Lee, and I teach modern Korean history at UCLA. I'd like to thank the organizers of this forum for inviting me to speak on this very important occasion. In this presentation, I will briefly talk about how the establishment of the truth of the Gwagnju massacre and rendering of justice to the victims of the violence, however limited in scope, was crucial to breaking away from the legacy of military authoritarianism and for the transition to democracy to take root in South Korea. During the 1980 Gwagnju Uprising, South Korea witnessed one of the most spectacular transformations of ordinary Koreans, from spectators into participants on a grand scale. With a remarkable degree of unity and solidarity, citizens of Gwagnju conducted themselves with dignity and fortitude during the 5 days when the city was left completely isolated, creating what political scientist Jung Choi called the absolute community, where the people of Gwagnju came together as one. The paradigmatic experience of the 1980 Gwagnju Uprising was most crucial in ushering in the project of transformative politics in the democratization movement of the 1980s, and later the notion of transitional justice in South Korean society at large. This was through the long and persistent demands to re-articulate from what the military-led state initially called a seditious riot by ruthless mobs on North Korean provocation into a part of the democratic movement. This process also transformed the visions of the democratization movement of the early 1980s to build a new society based on more expansive ideas that go beyond the principles and values of Western-style liberal democracy, tackling everything from South Korea's real and perceived independent status vis-a-vis the United States and Japan, and the military government's legitimacy, to the conglomerate's collusion with the state, to the equitable distribution of wealth, reevaluation of pre-existing values and meanings, and experimentation with new forms and contents in art, literature, music, and theater. The democratization movement became an epic contest of possibility against the givenness of things. The entire 1980s democratization movement and its vision for the future would not have been imaginable nor possible without the Gwagnju Uprising. The indiscriminate and brutal killing and naming of the people of Gwagnju by the special forces of the military caused an immense tragedy and suffering for thousands in Gwagnju and left a deep scar on the rest of the country. The state of terror continued in the immediate aftermath of Gwagnju as the military junta imprisoned indiscriminately those it regarded as seditious, and further sought to eradicate what it considered to be undesirable elements in the infamous project known as Re-Education Camp to purify 3 ills. Despite the fear and arrest and imprisonment and turning the pain and anger into collective energy, those who participated in or witnessed the Gwagnju Uprising, the families of those who were killed, injured, and missing, and the democratization movement activists put forward their demands for an investigation of the truth of Gwagnju, to seek out those responsible for ordering the paratroopers to shoot and savagely attack innocent bystanders, to demand that those guilty should be punished, and to demand that the honor of the citizens of Gwagnju should be restored. The demand for the truth of Gwagnju took many forms and much sacrifice. From the early 1980s, citizens of Gwagnju, along with the democratization movement participants, staged various kinds of public gatherings to remember the people who had fallen and to keep the spirit of Gwagnju alive. Many university students in particular paid a high price for the lead they took in demanding the truth of Gwagnju. Many of them threw themselves off buildings or burned themselves to death to inspire their fellow students to rise up against the Chunduhan regime and to alert the public to the urgency of finding the truth of Gwagnju. By the late 1980s, the continuous demands for the truth of Gwagnju had forced the government to acknowledge that the Gwagnju Uprising was, quote, part of the democratic movement of the students and citizens of Gwagnju, unquote. After numerous setbacks and disappointments for the people of Gwagnju and the public at large, the South Korean government also was pressured into opening the investigation and prosecuting the military leaders involved in the massacre. At the historical trial of 1996, the two former presidents, Chun Doo-han and Roh Tae-woo, were convicted of treason, corruption, and insurrection, along with those who had played a major role in the December 12th coup in 1979 and the 1980 Gwagnju massacre. The trial was momentous in the history of South Korea. The nation confronted its past authoritarian regimes and their original sin for the first time. Original sin in the South Korean political context refers to the takeover of the country by Chun Doo-han and his cronies in the December 12th military coup. What was more, the first two South Korean presidents to ever voluntarily step down from power faced charges of insurrection, treason, and murder. As historian An Byung-wook noted, opportunities to judge and punish authoritarian dictators occur usually during a time of revolution. The South Korea brought former rulers to face judgment in a court, not in a time of revolution, but in a time of parliamentary democracy, that these rulers would be judged according to the rule of law. The South Korea had an opportunity to investigate and assign responsibility for their wrongdoings, and that Korea had overcome what was widely perceived to be a disgraced history. All of these were considered by many to be a momentous event and an experimentation that had wider meanings, not only for South Korea, but also globally. The trial also symbolized not only the end of the military authoritarianism that had ruled Korea for over 30 years, but also the end of the military culture that was associated with it, such as the prevailing tendency until then to regard only end results while ignoring process, to consider only state-dictated standardized views while ignoring diversity of views and values, and to disregard individual sacrifice for the purpose of achieving state goals, all of which characterize the state-oriented thinking and policies under the previous regimes. It was also viewed that the people of South Korea, by exercising their rights as democratic citizens, had finally become owners of the Constitution and guardians of constitutional order, and had helped to restore the country's historical and political legitimacy. The trial also showed the determination of South Koreans that the mistakes of their generation would not be carried over too, and would wipe the slate clean for future generations. In the historical context of a divided Korea and of the Cold War structure in East Asia, however, the legal processes for settling the issues of the Gwagnju Uprising, again, however limited in its scope, should be recognized for their contribution to a greater consolidation of democracy by firmly bringing to a close the legacy of military rule and state violence. South Korea subsequently enacted special laws and the judicial process, for example, to provide compensation and restoring the honor of those who were wronged by the state, due to their involvement in the democratization movement, and to broaden the investigative scope of human rights violations committed by the state, which until then were considered a constituted part of state building and beyond the scope of legal and judicial remedies. These laws also considered to be successful cases of rectification of history and have become models for articulating legal and judicial remedies for other past wrongs committed by the state. It was in the process of counter-remembering Gwagnju as a people's rising up for democracy and justice against the official narrative of the rebellion of the violent mobs that the Gwagnju Uprising came to acquire its transformative possibilities and paradigmatic potency in the 1980s democratization movement, which gave rise to the 1987 transition to democracy. The people of Gwagnju and the May movement have continued to strive to revive the spirit of May 18 in the deeply transformed socio-political reality of contemporary South Korea. For example, the May movement organizations have spearheaded human rights and peace movements in solidarity with other Asian human rights and democratization movements. To keep the memory of Gwagnju alive is to continue to re-articulate the spirit of Gwagnju in the changed and global context, and to open up the unexpected field of possibilities and potentialities of the Gwagnju Uprising. Thank you.